The contracts problem from February of 2005 is an unusually difficult UCC question. Here we've got a hypothetical that requires us to know a fair amount of detailed law from fairly obscure sections of the testable issues arising out of commercial law. Let's have a look at the call of the question. 1. If Mart buys the 2000 Model X computers ordered on November 2 from wholesaler at $1,700 each, can it recover the $200 per unit difference from PC? Discuss. We'll stop right there. That's a very straightforward cover remedy issue arising out of the UCC. So far so good. Now turn to question 2. Is Mart entitled to buy the 1000 Model X computers ordered on November 15 for $1,500 each? Discuss. Well, here again, that is quite a specific question. We know that we're dealing with UCC problems, but we're going to have to dive into the fact pattern and try to figure out what's going on. Certainly, in order to answer either one of these questions, we're going to have to establish the existence of a valid agreement. So intellectually, we're thinking about formation, defenses to formation, breach, defenses to breach, etc. But we don't readily see exactly how we'll be able to apply this technique just by looking at the call of the question. These calls are so specific that the best we can do is sort of intuit that we'll have to establish a contract before we can get on to considering these remedies. So, once again, we see remedies issues are omnipresent. But always remember, a party isn't entitled to any remedies until that party can establish a valid theory of liability. And that's what Mart is going to have to do. It's clear that Mart is the plaintiff in this action. It also looks as if PC is the defendant. So let's go to the top of the question and review the facts together carefully. We find out that PC is a computer manufacturer. Mart is an electronics store retail outlet. And then we find out about the communications on August 1, on August 10, and on September 10. On August 1, we have what appears to be an offer, not an agreement, even though the word agree is used. On August 10, we have what appears to be an acceptance with the word accept even present, and a promise to put on an advertising campaign to support the sale. Then on September 10, there is no question that we've got an agreement at this point, because Mart mails an order for a specific number of computers, the first 1,000 computers out of 4,000 potentially. Mart follows through with its other promise and arranges an ad campaign, and the result is a success. The 1,000 units are all sold by the end of the following month. On November 2, Mart mails PC a letter indicating that business is excellent and ordering another 2,000 units. Okay, stop right there. What is the effect of this November 2 letter? I think probably the better interpretation would be to consider it a follow-up to the earlier order, pursuant to which this retailer has the right to sell up to 4,000 units. So with the mailbox rule in play, this order would be effective upon dispatch on November 2. But notice, before receiving this letter, on November 3rd, Mart's letter has not been received, and PC sends a fax indicating wholesaler is now our exclusive distributor. All future purchases have to go through wholesaler. Now let's just pause for a moment. Here we realize that if we know a lot about the UCC, we realize that what's going on here is we are being tested on something called the merchant's firm offer. This is about as difficult an issue as you can ever expect to see on a UCC essay, and here it is. Now, what do you know about the firm offer rule? Maybe not a great deal, but what I can tell you about it is this. Between merchants, a firm offer is going to remain open for 3 months. That's how long a firm offer is. The term in this contract is 6 months. So now we see that the defendant PC maker has a fairly good defense to breach. indicating that it has the right as a merchant to consider its firm offer over at the time that 3 months have passed, regardless of how many months were indicated in the initial offer. Now, I think this is an unsuccessful defense. That's coming from your man, the pro-defendant litigator. Here, I think that PC probably would best be found to be liable, if for no other reason than because of the detrimental reliance on the part of Mart in the marketing campaign that it engaged in. Now, I grant, right now, that one could reach the exact opposite conclusion, and the result would be that the answer would change. All the results would be the opposite to the ones that I reach. But remember, I'm not typically going to come to you and tell you what I think the only right answer is. Once in a while, I will. But here, I very much want to emphasize, reasonable people can reach opposite conclusions on the issues presented. But it depends on how you interpret the firm offer rule and the relationship between these two parties. So, we find now Mart, having received this fax from PC, tries to determine the status of its order, and it contacts Wholesaler. And Wholesaler says, you've got to pay another $200 per machine. And that's why we've got call of the question number 1, asking us if it pays the $1,700 per unit, will it be able to recover $200 per unit from PC? I answer that question yes, because I hold PC to be liable under the contract that was previously established. If you choose to interpret the merchant's firm offer rule, plus the fact that there was already one complete transaction, as enough to end that contract, well, fair enough. Reasonable people can differ, as I've said. Then on November 15, we have the last fax, Mart to PC, insisting on delivery and ordering the additional 1,000 units at the earlier contract price, hence the second call of the question. So the last thing we learned before the call, PC continues to insist that Mart deal with Wholesaler, and Wholesaler still refuses to be bound to the terms of the earlier agreement. Then we get the call of the question again. So, although this is a fairly long fact pattern, true to form, it isn't quite as difficult as it might have appeared on first blush. Now, flip the page and have a look at the outline of issues that I present. You'll see how simple I make it. I talk about formation and performance. We deal with offer and acceptance, then we focus on breach. And you'll see in the heading, I pose the question, is it a breach or is it a lawful termination of a merchant's firm offer? To my way of thinking, it's a pretty open question. And as you'll see, I conclude that it is a breach. Then I turn to remedies. The plaintiff is seeking damages for the November 2nd order and for the November 15 order. I talk briefly about restitution and equity as well, but this is a damages question, and that's where our energies are really going to go. Then I reach a conclusion that I give an entire separate section to, because I want my reasoning to be as transparent and as easy to understand as possible. So I established that a binding contract existed as of September 10. That's about the latest date that one can justify finding the agreement to have existed. I indicate that Mart will be able to recover the $200 difference per unit on the November 2nd order, and I conclude that Mart also is entitled to prevail as to the additional order below. So here I prove that I am not only capable of finding for the defendant. In my answer, the plaintiff wins across the board. So now let's have a look at my answer, and let me see if I can offer a few additional insights about how to write an effective answer under time constraints. Have a look at the very first paragraph that I write, and you'll see, again, as usually is the case, I lead with the facts. I identify the parties, I frame the dispute, and I indicate that not only will the UCC govern this agreement, but the merchant terms, the more liberal terms, will govern as well, because both of these parties are merchants. Then I talk about formation and performance, offer and acceptance, and you'll see, with regard to acceptance, I go into an unusual amount of detail without any further internal headings. This is a fairly complicated acceptance issue, and since my judgment is my judgment is based on how I evaluate these facts, so I don't really have any choice but to provide that analysis. Similarly, with regard to breach, I have to just do a narrative analysis. I have to write 4 or 5 paragraphs without any further internal headings. You'll see that I try to write as simply and directly as I can. In plain English, we try to put the subject, the verb, and the object as close together as possible and as close to the beginning of the sentence. And as you look at my model answer here, with regard to breach, I think you'll see I do a fairly consistent job writing simply, so that I express fairly complicated ideas in a way that a disinterested reader can understand quickly. Then I turn to remedies. Since we're in the world of the UCC, damages are the preferred remedy, and we've got very simple round numbers to work with, so only the most math-phobic among us aren't able to come up with very precise damages amounts. So with regard to the November 2 order, assuming you find it to be a valid order, as I do, the difference is $400,000. And I also indicate that if this plaintiff can find some other middleman who's willing to meet that price, well, then our plaintiff should go buy those computers out there and let the defendant get away with a so-called economic breach of contract. The plaintiff has a duty to mitigate, but all things being equal, this plaintiff is going to be able to recover $400,000 based on the November 2 order. With regard to the November 15 order, it's probably a somewhat closer call, but I find, once again, that the plaintiff is going to be able to recover here, too. I touched briefly on restitution and specific performance. As I indicated a couple of minutes ago, I don't really have much to say about them, but I want to make sure that I've sort of tipped my hat to all of the potential remedies, just to show the reader that I'm thinking. Finally, I reach the conclusions. First, that a binding contract was formed at the time Maker mailed his first order on September 10. I indicate that Mart can recover the $200 per unit difference, $400,000 there. Then I allow Mart to obtain an additional $200,000 on the second order. So here we've reviewed a UCC problem that is tackling a fairly sophisticated issue in a very straightforward way. This may be a fact pattern that allowed you to learn a little bit of law in that most practical of ways, as applied to a real essay question, as opposed to trying to study it out of a book.